You're very welcome to Butler Gallery and to International Women's Day and to our 80th anniversary collection exhibition. We're really pleased to be collaborating with Poetry Ireland on our first series of poetry encounters, where 4 artists featured in the exhibition are linked with poets who will read for their work, and together they will share and exchange insights into their own work. Delighted to welcome Liz Kelly of Poetry Ireland, who will introduce Jane Clarke, whom we're so happy to have here today. And I'll first introduce Felicity, just give you a little bit of background on her bio. Felicity clears practice, and we're sitting, of course, in front of the work Nothing Seems Normal Anymore from 2013, which she very kindly donated following her exhibition with us in 2014. And it hasn't had a sighting since, so we're delighted to have it in this exhibition. But Felicity Clear's practice involves the intersection of line, light and perception. Drawing in a variety of mediums and in various scales is at the core, from small two-dimensional works on paper to large sculptural installations and hand-drawn animation. The provisional nature of drawing and its other technical role in engineering, architecture and everyday life are central reference points. Perspective is often skewed, and three-dimensional elements cast shadows which present visual conundrums, effective metaphors for the systems that are ubiquitous in everyday life. Felicity is from Dublin and was educated at the National College of Art and Design, and later received an MA from Dún Laoghaire College of Art and Design and Technology. Her work has been included in many important museum curated group exhibitions. Solo exhibitions include, not so long ago, Una Young Gallery in Dublin, Butler Gallery in 2014, The Lab in Dublin, the Rubicon Gallery, the Lexicon Dún Laoghaire, Galway Art Centre and the Mermaid Art Centre. Her work is included in public and private collections, including the National Drawing Collection, the Arts Council, Goldman Sachs UK, and Felicity is also currently part-time lecturer at the National College of Art and Design. Pass you on to Liz now, fill you in a bit on Jane's bio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And we're ready for behaviour today in this second of the series of 4. And of course, the poetry, the poet comes alive, the poetry comes alive when we hear it read and when we hear it spoken. So we're going to have the pleasure of hearing from Jane Clarke, who would be in conversation with Felicity here today. Jane, fear I forget, is a poet, a facilitator, an environmentalist, hill walker, and from County Wicklow, for a very background County Wicklow, so that very much permeates and informs much of her work. Her first collection, The River, was published in 2015, and that was followed by All the Way Home and For the Tree Falls in 2019. She's an award-winning poet. She won the Hennessy Literary Award for Emerging Poetry and was shortlisted for the Pigott Poetry Prize and for the Irish Times Poetry Now Award. And she recently received the Ireland Chair of Poetry Travel Award, which enabled her to undertake a collaborative project with the writer and farmer James Rebanks in Cumbria, and subsequently Jane has developed that into a project with Burn Bio in County Clare, and many of you may be familiar with brilliant work that they do in Burn Bio, and Jane is now part of that project. Her new collection, A Shade of the Air, will be launched in May, and Jane, of course, is a contributor to our recent Poetry Ireland new special edition dedicated to Ivan Bolan. So we're very, very attached to Jane, very fond of her working. Delighted that she's here with us today. A Poetry Ireland view is for sale in the shop afterwards if anybody is interested. But I'm going to ask Jane to open proceedings with a poem.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much. I'll actually just stand up to read. I'm used to standing up for reading. Thanks very much, Liz. Thanks very much, Anna. It's a pleasure to be in Kilkenny. I had my first job ever was in Kilkenny College many, many years ago, and I've loved Kilkenny ever since. So I'm going to start with a poem. We're going to have a chat, myself and Felicity, but I wanted to start with a poem for International Women's Day. And this is the first outing of this poem, actually, in public, because it's for Jenny Wise Power. And you might have noticed she's one of the women that got a stamp in her. There's a stamp made of her just this past week. She was honoured along with Mary Robinson and 2 other women. So she was from Baltinglass, County Wicklow, really involved in the Ladies' Land League, right up through 1916, right up through the War of Independence, and she was the senator in Irish life, in the new state. But she's one of these women who hasn't been known at all. And so that's why this is just a chance to read a poem. And the title of the poem is No Men in a Fight for Freedom. That comes from a speech she gave in the Senate, basically where she was saying that after all the work the women did in 1916, 1922, 1923, they got forgotten when it came to so many different pieces of legislation. So this is the background to the poem. No men in a fight for freedom so quickly forgot the women who'd served alongside. Mill girls bombed bridges, nurses braved bullets to care for the wounded, maids delivered dispatches on bikes. Cleaners smuggled revolvers in buckets, mothers hid ammunition in prams, housewives stored explosives in their hats. Teachers protected arms dumps, waitresses spied. When the last shots were fired and the weapons buried in dunghills and bogs, no men so quickly forgot their pledge. And then I'll just give one other poem for International Women's Day, and this one is dedicated to my mother, who made a feminist out of me, even though she probably didn't even know the word. So hers. My mother said she just knew I was going to be a girl. 2 boys before me and 2 boys after, fodder for a hungry farm. But I was hers. She taught me the tricks of the trade. It looked like dinner is nearly ready if the table is set when he comes in. Bread and butter will fill them up. Add 3 drops of vinegar to water so your mirrors and windows will gleam. Cool your fingers before rubbing lard into flour for pastry. A handful of ground almonds will keep your fruitcake moist. Darn a few socks every night and never leave the ironing for more than a week. Don't cut off rhubarb stalks with a knife, just twist them clean from the crown. And always hold on to the children's allowance. A woman must have something of her own.
So there we go.
So of course it's lovely to have 2 women on International Women's Day here, so I'm just going to start at asking Felicity a few questions, and I thought maybe the best place to start would be with this wonderful piece behind us, and maybe you'd tell us about the making of it. And one of the things I'm interested in hearing about is inspiration. You know, where does it start? And this is what Felicity and I had a chat about 2 weeks ago. And that was one of my questions. And I suppose all artists want to learn from somebody else. How do you get it going? It's always your big question, you know? So maybe about how you got it going and what was your intention and then what it became.
Yeah, because it's a question that I have to ask you after I have discussed this, because I think it's probably quite different for poets, and I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, different artists make work in different ways, so this is just the way this one happened.
Yeah.
But this work belongs to an exhibition that I had in the old, also lovely Butler Gallery in 2014, and it was called Drawings, Plans and Projections. And when I was making the work, I was thinking about ideas, is what I was thinking about, weirdly. So the drawings in this are based on sculptures that I made from sticks, green gardening sticks. And I started making these kind of intuitive drawings with the sticks in thin air. So they were 3D drawings. I still call them drawings because they're very linear. So I get a stick and a glue gun, make them in thin air, quite intuitively, but referencing architecture, because I'm always kind of interested in the aspect of drawing that's kind of democratic, that belongs to the art world, but it belongs to everybody. So I'm always interested in that kind of crossover. So I had my sticks, and what they were is they were sort of ridiculous looking, not architectural maquettes. So they're maybe before an architectural maquette, and maybe like when an architect maybe has the beginning of an idea. And then I threw these maquettes together, and they didn't actually, they were never going to be buildings, they never had to stand up, and they were wobbly and kind of insubstantial. And then So I guess I was sort of thinking about nascent thinking about things, and how sometimes the beginning of a plan, or the plan that has maybe a lot of potential, but then inevitably, we don't know how things are going to work out. So by complete accident, they were sitting on a table in my studio, and I noticed that they were casting very interesting shadows from two directions. So I started tracing these shadows, and then I was quite pleased with the way they looked, because they're tricky from a perspectival point of view when you hang them up. So they are a little bit, you can't quite work them out. It's kind of nice that we're sitting under it, actually, because I think that's probably a good way to see it, quite close up in a way, because it's quite large scale, and that's because when you stand under it, the little structures kind of like slightly fall out on top of you. And the other plan in the drawing was that it wasn't quite representational, and it's not quite abstract. So the idea is that your eye might be kind of drawn in a kind of a restless way across the work, trying to make sense of it. So every now and then you see something that looks like a house, but then it kind of turns back into a pile of sticks. And the one last thing is that, of course, it takes quite a long time to draw that. So if you go up close, you can see all the little marks. So then the time then becomes part of the drawing, the time it takes to make the drawing. So I think when I was making the drawing, I was thinking about, and in all the work in that particular exhibition, there was these kind of like little visual slates of hand, if you want. So in some of the work, the drawing came right out onto the floor, and there were sticks on it, and then the shadows from the sticks mixed with the drawing, and you weren't quite sure what you were looking at. And I think my intention was that there's maybe an invitation to relook and to ask yourself, well, what am I actually seeing here, and what is going to stand up and what is going to collapse. So maybe an element of maybe shifting sands or something like that, and also something to do with kind of the gap between kind of an idea and possibility of success, or maybe it collapses and turns into ruin. So maybe the outcome, maybe there's always a little gap between there. So again, the last thing to say is that the title, Nothing Seems Normal Anymore, and it was made in 2013. So funnily enough, it was a lot like the pandemic, but in a very different way, because it was just after the financial crash, where it looked like systems that were very solid turned out to be less solid than we realized. So that's the kind of the background of that series of work. Right. It's probably a bit opaque now, just coming in fresh from the street. So I don't know whether any of you picked any of that up from it, or whether that's helpful that you now kind of get a little way into it. But what I wanted to ask you back about this is that this work is very process driven, so a lot of it is accidental, and you're kind of, a lot of work in fine art, and because I'm a fine art teacher as well, is you are moving forward with no real plan, or there is a sort of a vague plan, but you're sort of feeling your way, so you don't really know where you're going, and that's actually kind of dissimilar from, say, for example, design, where you might imagine a destination and figure out how to get there. Yes. We're more kind of like sallying forth on the paths of the unknown. Yes. So much of it is kind of process led, and much of it is to do with things that your maybe materials do, or things that you happen to see and introduce them. You don't really know where you're going, and there's quite a lot of mess involved, and dead ends, and maybe failures and returns and shifts. Yes. And also there's not normally a big beginning and an end. There's usually more like a muddle. Right. And every now and then you kind of stop and say, okay, no, this work seems ready, and we'll show it now, and then you continue with the thing. Yes. And I couldn't really imagine that happening in writing. So I'm just wondering, is there an equivalence there anywhere, or how does that happen?
Well, in fact, there really is, because Robert Frost, always said about the surprise. You won't surprise a reader if you don't surprise yourself, that you discover something in the writing. And I didn't really get that when I started, because I suppose maybe my head was doing more of the work initially. It was more a cerebral kind of, but the more I let myself go into writing, I found that you do discover things. I didn't know that, I found it in the writing. The more I write, the more surprises I get in where it goes. and that you start with something, because that was the thing that I was interested in, what gets you started? Because often for me it's emotion. I would say that's my biggest muse is just a strong emotional response to something. But it can also be a music, a line, so say that Jenny Wise Power, her speech was, no man in a fight for freedom so quickly that gave me, no man in a fight for freedom so quickly. So there's the music in the line. So when I heard the music in the first, that first bit of her speech, you wouldn't think a speech in the Senate would give you a poem, but it was the music in it that got me going. So, but what am I saying? I didn't know when that line got started in my head, I didn't know where I'd go with the poem, and it was only in the writing of it that it came to end at the pledge, which is about the proclamation and how women were so disillusioned because they really believed the proclamation would make a difference. But I suppose all of that is because I've read about this and I've learned about this, so it comes in surprising ways.
Is there mess?
Is
there iterations? Is there pages and pages and things in the floor? And
so many. Like you could do 50 versions of a poem and still put it away and still not have it work.
Yeah.
And there's ones I go back to and I don't know if I'll ever get them right, but there's something in me that brings me back to them. You'd be trying to get it to work. So loads mess.
Okay,
and loads of drafts, so many.
Is this
drafts.
all happening on a keyboard, or is it happening on I want it to be kind of like in a quill and
I know. Like I'd love that too, because I know writers who say they can only write but I actually do write on the keyboard.
And always did, so you wouldn't notice the difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But you start off with a line that becomes the last line, for example, or becomes into the middle, or you get rid of the first two stanzas, or there's loads and loads of drafts.
So you sort of let it out to begin with, and then just kind of deal with the consequences.
What I have to say to myself, I don't know if this helps you, but what I have to say to myself to let myself write is say it'll be a mess. It's not going to be any good. I have to sort of give myself permission. I know it sounds funny, it's a kind of a backwards thing. Just to not be, if I say I'm going to write a poem this morning, nothing will happen. But if I say I'm going to mess around, just going to mess around, then that allows me, and often out of the messing around something comes. But it's not to have too strict an expectation of myself. To free up.
Right, yeah, no, I recognise that certainly.
Relate to that?
I think that's partly why we consider it a process.
Yes.
So we don't really have a kind of an expectation that anything's going to be finished by the end of the day or even the end of the week. So it's kind of an ongoing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you sort of need that permission.
Yes.
And would you say, if you were giving advice to young poets, would you say show up? Like, is that the thing? Like,
absolutely, and let yourself. I read somewhere that the whole, this concept of failure, that you're very interested in that. This philosopher who'd written about drawing, and the line, and that the drawing is inevitably failure. There's some line, maybe you'll tell me in a minute. And I just thought you have to allow yourself to fail. You have to. So that's what I would say to poets getting started. Let yourself mess around, let yourself fail, let yourself draft. But also, I would also say, get the views of others. Yeah. So that's where, so I wanted to talk to you about that, because in poetry, workshopping with others is really important. It's a key part of nearly every poet I know is in a group where they're getting feedback on their work. And like I have a group I go to every month with 2 new poems, and more often than not, the poem I think is the good one, they don't think is working, and they think the other one, so I'm often wrong at that stage about my work. So, what about you? Do you workshop?
I was like, what? You do what?
So here we're different.
I think absolutely not, actually, I
really?
would say.
Yeah.
Like, I would think like there might be 1 or 2 people that you trust, or who you think are interested in the same things that you are, that you might have chats with. But how many people might be in this group?
Oh yeah, but it'd be a group of 5.
5?
Yeah. You're fine. Very
I
trusted.
don't know. I mean, maybe I'm unusual, but I don't think so. I don't.
Right,
I
so-
think that's quite rare. I think maybe 2 or 3 people that maybe you've known for quite a while, or
Yeah.
you trust. Or I think crucially that you think that they're interested in the same things within visual arts that you're interested in.
Right.
Because otherwise, you
Yeah.
may totally think that they're you might really like their work and you might really respect their work, but they may not be just interested in the same thing. So therefore,
Yes.
you would wonder about the use of it,
Right.
or the same
And
things
so
that
when
you're
you
trying
say
to get
the
at.
same things, like what, for example, what would people need to be interested in? What is it that you'd be looking for people to be interested in, like yours?
I suppose that's sort of the kind of ideas you're dealing with, or the way you approach them, or the way whether you approach through a process, or whether you're into drawing, like a number of things. I am in a drawing collective now.
Right.
And one of the artists is here. And we are now beginning to critique our work, each other's work slightly, but that's quite a while. Like, we've known each other 6 years, and we've done several shows together. So and now we're beginning.
So then if you don't
and nobody's inviting this,
And if you don't get that critique from outside, then it's your own critique. Then it's you judge. You judge. And so did it take? Did you have that from very early on as an artist? That sense of authority?
No, because actually you get quite a lot of critique in art college.
Right.
But eventually you have to take responsibility for yourself.
Yes.
Now, the only way other than that you might get some critique is because you might be doing studio visits with curators. So a nice aspect of the art world is that you can invite curators to come to your studio, and they probably will come. They're very generous, actually, in general. And nothing may come of it, but they will certainly come and have a conversation with you about your work.
Right.
So you might have a bit of dialogue that way.
Right. So that would be curators of galleries.
Of galleries,
you
or
invite.
But like Anna
Yes.
or Pat Murphy in the RHA or something. They would come.
Yes.
They would come and have a chat.
Okay.
And they would sort of say what they mightn't even say what they think about your work, actually. But they might talk around it.
Yes.
But I think young artists, maybe when they're starting out, might have groups where they might share. But I think it's more like, when artists start out, they're very, very often in group studios. So they get their communality by working alongside each other, but not necessarily group critiquing each other, I think, probably. I mean, there are a few artists here, and they may correct me later on that.
I think that's very interesting. It's a very interesting contrast because you see, in a way, as a poet, you're totally on your own. Do you know what I mean?
That might be the difference, actually.
You're off on your own.
Yeah.
And then you come together maybe once a month or once every 2 months.
So you'd sort of need that just to...
that's where, so that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that could be that,
I have seen, say, print artists working together, or, and I've often thought, God, how could they do that? How could they work in the same room? Because I just want silence and I want to be away from everything. So,
But they would, well, very often they have their own space, but they might be a communal area where they'll meet each other. And it's always like what we tell students, the first thing you have to tell students to do when they're leaving art college is get into a group studios, because otherwise you will actually go out of your mind.
Right.
It's so, like, to be that solitary
Yes.
is so, and also because you're so weird, because you're not because you're an artist, but because you're not out earning, you're just not really on a career path. That's very obvious to everybody. So, and also you're just on your own, as you know.
Yes.
So actually now I think I've just realised that's the key there. So that must be the significance of the writing workshops. Yeah.
So we're both saying the need for companionship as artists, the need for solitariness and companionship.
Yeah, very much so. I would say.
And how do you kind of get the right balance of that, and the different ways of getting that? I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
It is. Yeah,
I didn't realise that.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if maybe I'd read another 2 poems here now, just at this pause, because when I was looking at Felicity's work online in preparation for today, I came across this piece and I just absolutely loved it. And so I talked to Felicity, and so she brought it along today, because it was interesting because I had been writing a new poem, and to me it spoke to this, or Felicity's piece spoke to the poem. And I suppose the gas thing, I mean, this is, I suppose what you find is what people see in what you've made. What I saw in this piece is a nest. Now, nobody else might see that, but that's what I saw. And so I'll read the poem that accompanies this in my mind. Okay. Coracle. The mottled brown blackbird will not let the wind distract her. She's gathering moss, roots, twigs, ribs of bark and tattered leaves. She lifts a scrap of baling twine, bright blue in her yellow beak, weaves it into the bowl hidden low in the hawthorn hedge. She plasters her nest with muck from the sheep shed, then molds it around her body till it's robust as wattle and daub. There will come magpies, foxes, badgers, stoats, and still she lays her heart in that basket boat. And then I wanted to read another one in response to another piece here. See this piece over here? This one is by Helena Gorey, who's here with us today, and her piece is called Chickweed. So I have a poem, Chickweed, so I thought I'd read it as well to go with it. And Helena, I think you're very interested in environmental issues, I think, as well, yeah? So chickweed, and chickweed is, if you're looking in your ditches at the moment, you'll see chickweed everywhere. And you know, it's a very tiny, tiny little wildflower. You could not see it, you know, but because it's so tiny, but it's well worth stooping to look at it. And it's Stellaria Medea is its name in Latin. When everything else has died back in winter, your stars surprise like an early spring. All you need is a breeze to open your heart. Seeds of desire fly into meadows, ditches, and the vegetable beds my mother has readied for planting. A torment, she calls you. My grandmother called you tongue grass. Together we gathered clumps for her hens. We knelt to gaze at your petals, the clefts that made 5 look like 10. A salve for cracked skin, she said, and as a poultice in muslin, the best cure for mumps. But the doctor shook his head. The day of the pishogue is dead. Thank you. Beautiful.
It's nice. Sorry. So anyway,
Yes.
So what I wanted to ask you was about the visual in writing. And I always think it's absolutely magical the way some writers, you in particular, can actually really conjure up a very visual picture with your words, whereas other writers seem to describe things, but it doesn't happen. So I'm not quite sure how that magic gets put together, that you can actually just, it's so atmospheric and so specifically so visual, I think.
Well, first of all, it's a huge compliment to me that you would say that. And maybe I should admit here, I hated art in school. that was the one class I didn't want to go into. So the fact that if I write poems that are visual, I think is kind of amazing, you know. But I suppose, I would always, again, when I'm, you know, teaching other people about poetry, the things I say to them, I always say to them that I think poems are much closer to paintings than to novels. I don't think poetry should be taught in literature at all. I don't think that's where it belongs. I think it belongs more with music and painting, to my side, to the fine arts,
that's
actually.
interesting, yeah.
And the two things I'd be always saying to people, you know, make it visual and make it musical. They're the two things I'd say about a poem. So that people are hearing something that moves them, but they're also seeing something. Because I think what poetry tries to do is to find, it's about what is inexpressible. It's actually because we, you know, it's all about words, but actually the most important things in life we can't find the words for. You know, and you know when someone is bereaved, you always want to say, you know, I don't know what to say, or there's no words. That's what we always say, because there are things that are just too hard. So I think that's what poetry tries to do. It tries to put words, but in a way that evokes, because you can't say it, so you evoke something, and then people feel, yes, that's it, you've got it.
So would you say then that you might be leaving a gap in poems where a reader can come along and have a number of readings of it?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's very like visual art. So if, we would always try and leave some ambiguity, I think.
Yes.
I would leave some ambiguity so that there are multiple possible readings, and that there is a space for the viewer or the reader to insert themselves or to take part. In the, would you?
Absolutely.
Whereas maybe not so much in like some kinds of fiction where, you know, it has to be explained to you because it's got a kind of complicated plot or something.
Yeah, no,
So-
I think that's the risky thing, is to leave an openness.
Okay,
And
that's
to
very
leave
interesting.
a space. And that's why I often find it hard talking about a particular poem, because in a way you want it to be everybody else's poem. Once you've written it, you have, you know, of course it still means for you, but actually that's much less important than what it means for the reader.
For other people,
what
yeah,
it does.
okay.
And if it isn't doing something for them, then it isn't working. If it doesn't do something for anybody else, it's not, it's a private expression, and that's good and well, but it's what it means to the reader. But so I wanted to ask you, so for example, when I saw a nest there, did that totally surprise you, for example?
Well, I guess not entirely, because it is roundy, but it certainly wasn't in there when I was making it. It's kind of more, what that was to do with was I was started, the same architectural lines are in the background of that print, but I started messing them up with bits of stuff from around the studio, which is quite near the corporation markets in Dublin, the old fruit and vegetable markets. So I was picking up bits and pieces of plastic and building materials,
like the blackbird,
and I was throwing them on top of my things, and then the curve was interrupting the line, and it was kind of messing life up a bit, and it was complicating things, and then it suddenly turned into a bit of a vortex on the studio floor. And in that one there's even kind of the beginnings of my later obsession with weather in there, because there's a few weather symbols. So and the little figures relate to a form of art that started in the Renaissance and went on to the Baroque, called a capriccio. And a capriccio is a fantasy ruin. So it's like, if you can imagine old paintings where there's a ruin and everybody's looking up and doing, oh. So can you imagine those paintings? Have you seen them? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. So anyway, the ruins in them are frequently made up, or partly made up. They might start off as like a Greek ruin and have something else built on top of it. And the people are just being, you know, and also they're, you know, the whole idea of ruin is like glory's now past, this kind of the other, right? So they're sort of, I think the little figures are kind of in there. They're actually borrowed from some of them are borrowed from Canaletto, and some of them are borrowed from other artists. So I've taken them out of the paintings and I put them on the print, and they're all being a bit sort of stunned by this kind of just vortex of uncertainty, I think basically is what it is, coming towards them and puzzling them slightly.
I love what you've done here. I mean, other people might come up later to see the little
guys
figures
who escaped.
But do you like, what's your intention as regards the audience for your work?
I suppose questioning, I think maybe.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, questioning.
Yes.
Well, pleasure, because I love drawing. So I think I would get a lot of pleasure from looking at drawing or painting. You know, so I guess I would never discount. What does Isabel Nolan call it? Something for the eye, you know, some kind of gift to the viewer that's going to like entertain them, you know. So you don't want to make, I mean, I don't want to make my work too cold.
Yes.
You know, I do want it to have a warmth and a sort of the material sensuality.
Yes.
And then something that might just, you know, make your mind work a bit. So I was just thinking about what you said about emotion. I wouldn't start maybe with, did you say emotion? Was that the word you used? Yeah, emotion. I maybe don't think I'd start with emotion, but there's a big sort of ongoing question of like how to live in the world, or how to be in the world, or what is the world, and you know, how are we managing,
Yes.
you know what's going on around us. So kind of a question, just
Yes.
questions about,
Right.
in a kind of an abstract way, I think. So that's kind of running along in the background.
Yeah. It's funny, I'm just thinking, another thing that I think I do a good bit is praise. You know, sort of see something beautiful and want to praise it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, like praising the blackbird.
No,
you know, would that be something for you?
Yeah, I think maybe in the current work I'm doing, it certainly is, because I've started working on the weather, as I was telling you earlier on. So I've started working from weather stations. I've got my own weather station, and I'm taking information out of my weather station and data, and I'm making them into these quite elaborate drawings. And that has to do, I took a module in climate and weather in UCD during COVID, and it told me about the complexity of the Earth's atmospheric envelope. And it's kind of the beauty and the complexity of that system. I guess systems are kind of running through it as well. That now has me very interested. Right. So it's not necessarily a critique. It's more like a wow. So wonder would definitely be in there.
Yes.
I think wonder.
Yeah, wonder
would definitely be part of it.
Yeah, lovely.
And even wonder. Wow, you can make a drawing that big, can you?
Yes.
That kind of wonder.
Yes.
You know. So.
And isn't science in your background?
Yeah.
So that's you're coming back to it now.
Yeah. I studied science before I went to the NCAD.
Yeah.
And at the time when I was leaving science and saying, oh my God. So the more you go on in science, the more you know about less.
Right.
And it just gets narrower and narrower and narrower, more and more in depth. And I decided that I was really more of a broad picture person, and I wasn't going to actually be able to go down that tunnel. So I had to do a kind of a swift maneuver, and then went up to art college. Funnily enough, I think they're becoming closer, because I think art is becoming more questioning of the world in a kind of more direct way. And science has made such extraordinary leaps and bounds, even in those intervening years, due to the internet and the information connecting and getting out there, that I think they're actually now kind of grappling with similar questions.
Right. Okay.
But actually, because I know artists are really in love with science, but to be honest, the scientific training is very, very. You don't get to chance your arm. Like visual artists are quite good at chancing their arm.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I just did that. I just read that essay on quantum physics, and now I know all about it. And I'm going to put it in my work. So it's I think, but they're very good at connecting, and they're very good. I think what artists do best is they connect things that shouldn't normally connect.
Right.
So this is their great thing. So they're very good at saying, oh, I know that sounds like that. Why don't we put them together and see what happens?
Yeah.
And they are also very good at questioning sort of systems that are prevailing, ways of doing business. So there is some really good reasons why artists and scientists should hang out more. To be madly in love with science is to be willing to go down a very narrow hole.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's a lot of learning. So I have huge respect for them, and I did meet them in Trinity, and they were really like that.
Right.
People who actually grew up in County Wicklow on a farm, and the next thing you know, they're just in science, and all they want to know is every species of earwig, literally, and they're quite specific, and they're like they're almost born that way. The way artists and writers are almost born that way.
Yeah.
Which is
No,
very
that's lovely.
interesting.
And just to say, the thing that you say about the artists connecting and connecting unexpected things, that's the definition of metaphor for poets.
Yes,
that the best metaphors are where you connect something that's surprising, but it works, it makes sense, that you talk about one thing as if it's something else. So, just that reminds me of that when you said that. But maybe I'd read another...
I'm going to read now.
Oh, you're going to read.
I'm going to read your poem.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to read, because this is a demonstration of the visual, I think, among other things, and the extraordinary evocation of atmosphere. So it's called Point of Departure.
Okay.
A Sunday evening in January. My father is taking me to the train because my mother can't. Her heart is broken over what I told her. Just my father and me, unused to this time together, quiet except for the engine's hum and the sweep of wipers. But in his silence I hear a rhythm. He's cutting thistles with a scythe. A gate opens into a meadow I have never seen. Isn't that just perfect? Isn't it just perfect? It's just so, I don't know, it's just so perfect. And it's so filmic. Like, can't you just see it? I can just so see that. I can see the car. I can see the window through. But I can feel the kind of tension. I can feel the love. I can feel the kind of unstated emotions. I can see colours. I can see, greys. I can see the colours of this whole scene, and it's sort of something in the kind of unexpressed emotion. It's kind of got the energy of Colleen Kuhn a bit, I think, doesn't it? Yeah.
So the side as well. You can actually hear the side.
Can't you? Yeah. But it's kind of incredible to me that somebody can conjure up something so sort of specifically visual with words that I think, even an artist worth their money would have a job conjuring up that specific atmosphere. So it's really, really beautiful.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. Well, maybe if I can read a poem then by somebody else, actually. First of all, I just have to say that Liz inadvertently said I grew up on a farm in Wicklow. Just the people in County Roscommon would kill me if I didn't say. No, she's right.
I thought it didn't sound like
she's right. I'm living in Wicklow for over 30 years, so that's okay. But just, the people in Roscommon, I just have to say.
They would know.
Because whenever I'm on the radio, I was on Countrywide recently, and my brother rings up afterwards and says, "You mentioned Fury 3 times." Like, that's all that matters, of course, the local place. Anyway, I'm going to read a poem by a poet from Kilkenny, Shirley McClure, my dear friend, who died a number of years ago. But it was Shirley who brought me to Kilkenny for the very first time when I was about 18. We met in Trinity, we studied English together, and she was a wonderful poet and much loved. And this is her new and collected poem. She had published 3 books already, but after her death we put all her poems together here. And so I just thought, because I'm in Kilkenny, I wanted to read a poem by Shirley, and I think you'll like it. This one is called Sweet Apples. It's the opening poem of the collection. Oh, and just to say, Shirley's father was the principal of Kilkenny College. So many of you would have come across him, in your lives in Kilkenny, I'm sure. Sweet apples. Say you owned a house with 1 tree in the garden, and from that tree toppled the most aromatic apples in town. Would you allow those apples to rot on the grass, make food for the jackdaws that worried your cat? Or would you cook up strudels, pies, sauces, drink cider as the snow fell on the abiding branches of your only tree? So there you go.
Lovely. I want to claim my Kilkenny connections. My mother is from Castlecomer.
There you go.
And my father has people in Coolcullen, or had, yeah. So.
Very good.
If we're claiming connections.
Yeah, exactly. Very important. So I'm just looking at our time. We're coming up to 1:45, so I'm just checking. Do you want to ask questions, or how are we doing on time, or what would you like?
Yes, there we go, Bob. Our station for reliable.
How important is the title to your painting, your poem to you, either as you begin or as you finish, and how do you think of the random viewer or reader, meaning someone who doesn't know your work? What value is the title to that? You consider that.
Yeah, you answer that.
It's in my work and in quite a lot of visual arts, it can be a key into the work. So if the work is a little bit unreadable, like this one, so this is called Nothing is Normal Anymore. So then you kind of get a sense of, well, it must be about maybe shift or flux or something like that. So often when you're making work, it comes to you automatically, and you're very delighted with yourself because it helps you almost focus what you're doing as well. So it can be quite important. And then sometimes nothing comes, so then you just have to call it untitled and just hope that the viewer can work it out by themselves. But I would say titles are very important.
Yeah. And I'd say titles are very important as well. So
Yeah.
that was one of the questions I was going to ask, actually, because I think that's interesting. Yeah, you would, getting the right title for the poem. Sometimes it's very obvious, like Chickweed, but, Coracle wasn't such an obvious title. And sometimes you just lift a poem totally by finding the right title, actually, So it is very important.
Poets don't ever call their work untitled, do they?
Rarely. I think some do. No, there are poets who write without using titles.
Do they?
They
Yeah,
number
yeah.
them, or
Yeah.
but quite rare. Yeah, and it's an important part of it. Yeah. Any other?
I want to ask the artists in the audience, do they agree with me about the difference between when I was surprised that Jane was doing these kind of group crits, we'll say, what we would call a group crit once a month. Are there any artists here that would say, no, I totally identify with that? Or did you sort of think that, no, that would be something fairly rare? Did you? Yeah, rare, yeah. Would you say it's rare too?
When we were just mentioning about this group at Felicity, drawing these centres, like method drawing in Ireland, I know there's the National Drawing Centre, which we both work in with by the Method Drawing Collection. But it is interesting, come to work together over a period of time, different artistic exhibitions. There is that in coming in it. It's a real generosity, and it's a real sort of, as you say, you have to be very sure.
Yeah.
Have some shared ideas with. And it's actually quite exciting to have that process.
It is, yeah. So it's rare. It's exciting because it's rare. Then I wasn't.
Yes.
I'm not just like kind of the only loner artist in the world. So it's good to hear. You agree too, obviously.
Yeah.
The thing probably with younger artists, like you said, starting off group shows or group studios.
Yeah.
And there are kind of more of those kind of younger collectives.
Yeah.
Like people who are working together, start from kind of college side, but then they do tend to branch out. And so I think for our people who are longer practicing artists, it is that solitary thing. I think it's the idea of maybe too many ideas coming in and directing you, like
That's right.
it's a sense of, you don't know where you're going yet.
That's it. Yeah, that's absolutely it. Yeah.
And it's about trusting that process, that you've been around enough times on that treadmill that you're going to get to that point, so you have to trust that process.
Yeah.
And if you interfere with the process, it's like the wheels come off.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like, it gets
Yeah.
watered down or something.
Yeah.
And what about you guys? You're in a collective, aren't you, Helen? And
Totally agree.
yeah, you don't critique each other's work then?
Only if it's asked for, really.
Yeah,
Something is
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's very
Would you
interesting.
stick to your guns if you didn't agree with the criticism?
Yeah.
Continue on despite all of that?
Well, I guess it might ring true in part, but I think, yeah. But what about you? Because you're the kind of person who's getting the critique. I'm not getting any. I'm just doing my own thing. Happy out.
Yeah,
So
no,
it's you. It's you.
There
yeah.
is a moment where you have to say, no, I decide. You always decide at the end. You do.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I really, I wouldn't be telling the truth if I didn't say that the people around me really contribute to the work. It comes out of a communal act. I don't see it as just a solitary act. It's interesting, that book wouldn't be as good as it is if I hadn't these people around me who helped me with it. And they're trusted people, and they're people now who I've been working with for 15, 20 years, But,
And is it a long process? I mean, Felicity talks about process, but poets, I mean, you say, would you go back to things over and over again, leave them for a while, come back to them?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, say, each of my books, the first book was about 10 years in the making. The next book was about 4 years in the making, and then the third 4 years in the making. So, but that would be 50 poems over a 4-year period. But there would be still some poems from right back at the beginning that I might get to work sometime. Like the title poem in my first collection, and that one I might just read it, but it was 10 years in the making. But Elizabeth Bishop had this wonderful poem, The Moose, which was 20 years in the making, like, because they have the drafts the whole way through, and she kept going back to it, and I read that about her, and that was so helpful. That's probably why this poem survived, because I read, well, Elizabeth Bishop took 20 years, it's okay to, it's like you have something, there's something valuable there, but you know it isn't right yet. So you have to keep, sometimes you just have to give it time, go away from it, leave it, Maybe I'll read that one, and maybe and then maybe we'll come to a close. So this is the title poem of my first collection, and it's a kind of a meditation. I'll stand up for it. A meditation on the nature of grieving. The river. What surprises me now is not that you're gone, but how I go on without you, as if I'd lost no more than a finger. My hand, still strong, perhaps stronger, can do what it must, like carving your name on a branch from the beach by the suck, letting the river take you so I can call myself free. Only sometimes, like yesterday, or the day before, last night, or this morning, the river flows backwards, uphill, to my door. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
If we don't have any questions, we'll probably end for now. Thank you both Felicity and Jay for joining us today, and Liz Kelly for being here also. And look forward to our next gathering together. Keep an eye on our website for the next Poetry Encounters. But thank you all for coming today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.